This extremely important and critical story answers the question of where do ex-NYPD police officers go after they have a documented history of extreme police brutality, extreme violence, and corruption in the NYPD Police Department against the good people of New York City. They get hired by the Village of Cold Spring, New York, Board of Trustees and Mayor. And this story will show you specific police officers that have been hired after extreme documented police brutality with a depraved indifference to bringing these brutal, violent ex-NYPD officers into the community of Cold Spring, New York. You will not want to miss a second of this video. Stay tuned until the very end. We will together create police reform and make America free again. Welcome, everyone. I am Leroy Truth for Leroy Truth Investigations, and always record the police, because without those recordings, we've got nothing. We've got their word against ours. Even though they are known liars and are legally allowed to lie, they are the ones who are believed by the judges and many times the juries. Now, today's story, close to home, from my personal experience. One of my favorite places, or what used to be one of my favorite places to visit in the whole world, was a little village called the Village of Cold Spring, nestled on the Hudson River right near West Point. Beautiful place, awesome people, wonderful restaurants, wonderful antique shops. Many rich and famous celebrities go there antiquing. However, stay away. They have a history of hiring the most violent, corrupt ex-NYPD police. I personally experienced that. What happened? What was my experience? I was just plugging my phone in to charge it, and suddenly there is a police officer screaming, yelling at me, and I'm looking like, what's going on? So I roll my window down, and this guy, whose name is Kenneth Baker, ex-NYPD, major police brutality lawsuits that have been settled, and he is yelling at me so aggressively. You can't park there. You can't park there. What are you doing there? All he had to say was, you're double parked, and can you move? I said, yeah, I'm going to be leaving literally right now. But he didn't like that. You know what? Why stop giving me an attitude? And I wasn't happy with his attitude. Well, he didn't like that I wasn't giving him fealty. Now, let's take a look. Imagine you are on the hiring committee. You're one of the village board of trustees. Let's look at Kenneth Baker's record here. Just take a look. Kenneth Baker, badge number 5651. Former detective, grade 3, officer of information technology, also served at the narcotics division. Oh, look at this. Lawsuit. 30 allegations, 13 complaints, including physical force, race, physical force, strip search, physical force, gun pointed, threat of arrest, threat of force, verbal or physical force, gun pointed, frisk or search. Then let's take a look at lawsuit settlements. There are 8 known lawsuit settlements totaling at least or over $300,000 that the people paid out in New York City. Let's take a look at some of these here. We have here $90,000 settlement. Here's the complaint here. Defendant officers sawed open plaintiff's home door, pushed plaintiff and family members on the ground, and yelled offensive language. Kenneth Baker is in the suit. Plaintiff was handcuffed excessively tight and forced into a police van wearing nightclothes. Officers drove around for hours, including stopping for breakfast, while plaintiffs were in van, probably peeing all over themselves. Plaintiffs were illegally strip searched. Plaintiff's house was ransacked, and property, including cash and clothes, was never returned. Charges were dismissed because Officer Glover failed to appear in court. That's just 1 out of 8, ladies and gentlemen. Torture, sadistic, brutal, stealing. There was no accountability here. These cops got away with stealing their money and their belongings, this innocent family. Continuing. Gonzalez et al. Versus City of New York. Here we go. Kenneth Baker right here. Description. On March 4th, 2011, plaintiffs were inside of their home on 80 West 170th Street, apartment 2A in the Bronx. Defendant officers stormed into the plaintiff's home and assaulted and battered them. Is that professional policing or is that sadistic brutality and torture? I'll let you answer that. If defendants had a search warrant for the apartment, it was issued upon the basis of extremely unreliable information, and the police did not follow NYPD policies, or how about human rights and human decency, and procedures in obtaining and executing such a warrant. Ms. Gonzalez was dragged from her bedroom into the living room where the officers further abused the plaintiffs. No contraband was recovered, meaning no drugs, and the officers falsely arrested the plaintiffs. This is Officer Kenneth Baker, the brutal, aggressive cop who's trying to intimidate me, and he's employed gainfully by the village of Cold Spring, hired by the trustees. They need to be fired. They need to resign immediately. I want the people of Cold Spring to know how egregiously corrupt and incompetent their village of board of trustees is to hire people like him. But hey, we're not done yet. The plaintiffs were put into a prisoner van and driven around for approximately 5 hours. Can you believe this? New York City, freaking precincts right down the block. They're doing that to torture people, probably hitting the brakes. Remember one gentleman, he was paralyzed. I think he may have died as well, but he was paralyzed because officers did this to him. They were torturing him in a van. 5 hours. But we're not done yet. Now, Herzog versus City of New York et al. $35,000 settlement. Description. On June 20th, 2007, plaintiff was a pedestrian in front of his residence located at 1056 Boynton Avenue in the Bronx. It was during this time when defendant Lopez, together with other defendant NYPD officers, including Kenneth Baker, grabbed the plaintiff and slammed him into the ground, put handcuffs on him, and placed him into a police van. We got a theme going on here, ladies and gentlemen. Defendant Lopez, together with other defendant NYPD officers, drove said van with plaintiff imprisoned inside for approximately 2 to 3 hours. You see how they love doing this stuff? They're sadistic. They love torturing people, regardless of whether they committed the crime. And even the worst criminal, a murderer or a rapist, a police officer is supposed to still treat them with professionalism, not torture them in a van for hours and slam them against cars and so forth. Eventually, the plaintiff was transported to an NYPD precinct where he was subjected to an unlawful strip search. Unlawful strip search, but these cops, all this happened, and they kept working. His clothes removed, he had to squat and cough. The plaintiff was arraigned in the Bronx County Supreme Court Criminal Division on baseless charges. Continues here, good old Kenneth Baker. Scarrett versus City of New York et al. Description. On May 3rd, 2011, plaintiff was present within the vicinity of Cambridge Road and Creston Avenue in the Bronx. One of the defendant officers came up to him, patted him on the shoulder, lacked reasonable suspicion while doing so, and threw the plaintiff against the car and searched him. Violence. What if you or I did that to someone, ladies and gentlemen? Would we just be able to go on our day? Would we still have a job? No. We'd be handcuffed with malice and arrested and tortured in a van for 2 or 3 hours. Plaintiff told the officers he had screws in the spine, the result of prior surgery, but the officers responded in sum and substance. If one person goes to the hospital, we all go to the hospital. Plaintiff was taken to a police precinct. I mean, this is just absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting what we're seeing here. Yet Officer Kenneth Baker, not only did he get continued employment at the NYPD, he received promotions where he became a detective. 3rd grade detective there. And the list goes on. And there's more and more. Documented and public record. But the wise men and women of the Cold Spring Village Board of Trustees, they know something we didn't. They love to hire police with extremely brutal records against the general public. Now, let's get over to Lawrence Burke, who is now the officer in charge. Oh, look at him. He's also from the Bronx. What are the chances? We got a theme going on here. This is Lawrence Burke. 9 allegations. Again, if they say unfounded or exonerated, doesn't mean anything. And this is a fraction of what actually goes on. It's the tip of the iceberg. Accused of gun pointed at someone, strip search, frisk and search, physical force used, other blunt instrument used. Oh, other blunt instrument as a club, physical force, gun pointed, force. And this is good old Officer Burke, who is now in charge. The officer in charge. Now, he then ends up suggesting, take a look at this. Trustees also approved, this is in 2019, a recommendation by Larry Burke, officer in charge of the Cold Spring Police Department. Yeah, he's a stellar member of society, right? To hire Ken Baker as a patrol officer. Baker, a 22-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, also in the Bronx, good buddies, I'll bet, recently retired as a detective. Before this video was released, an attempt was made to post this information on the Cold Spring, New York Facebook page. The comment section was immediately blocked and restricted, telling me there is truth to this information. Honest people have conversations. Deceptive people hide. I am going to quickly mention the ticket that I got from Officer Kenneth Baker of the Cold Spring, New York Police Department, badge number 20. And he cited me for using an electronic device while operating a motor vehicle, which I was absolutely not doing since my car was in park. It was stopped. The engine was off. But this is not about my ticket. This is about operating under deprivation of rights under color of law, and it's about the abuse of a law that was designed to stop people from texting and driving into a telephone pole or killing a family in a car accident. It is meant to prevent someone from using their cell phone, while they are on a busy road in the flow of traffic. Now, Officer Kenneth Baker and the spineless prosecutor are stretching and abusing that law in an attempt to give me a 5-point ticket plus fines plus court fees because I was pulled safely out of the flow of traffic on an extremely sleepy one-way street where hardly any cars go, where people walk faster than the cars. This story is about what was revealed as a result of the aggressive interaction that Officer Kenneth Baker had with me. So then I go to court, and I'm waiting for the judge. I'm in the courtroom. It's a very, very tiny town, a beautiful town. Less than 2,000 people, population of the village of Cold Spring, New York. While I'm waiting quietly in this very small courtroom, suddenly this aggressive Kenneth Baker, ex-NYPD, badge number 5651. So he calls me out of the courtroom, asks me to leave the courtroom and enter a small office that was outside of the courtroom down the hallway. So I entered the office and I didn't close the door because, guys, he's wound too tight. This guy seems like he's about to blow up like a stick of dynamite. Then he said, close the door, close the door. All right, whatever, close the door. First, he's all nice and friendly. Then he gets serious, and he says, so what do you want to do about this citation? I said, I want you to dismiss it because I didn't do it. I know. Then he gets angry and attempts to intimidate me into taking a plea bargain, which is the way this town operates, by the way. And he gets angry, he starts yelling. He says, you don't know the law. I know the law. I'll offer you a reduction where it will be disregarding a traffic device, only 2 points instead of 5 points, and only $200 fine instead of, I think, $300 fine. I says, no, I am not taking that. I am innocent of what you wrote me a citation for. And he says, well, I'll educate you in front of the judge. I said, good, let's go in front of the judge. And he got angrier and he's trying to, intimidate me to taking this plea bargain, and I will not do it. I'm innocent of that charge. And so finally, and he's escalating things there. And for my safety, I leave the office. However, as I leave the office, I turn around and I call him a jackass, which was very mild to how he was actually acting. Well, he didn't like that. So I leave the office, go down the hallway into the judge's courtroom. I'm sitting silently in the courtroom, waiting for my time to talk with the judge and give him the facts, and ideally he would dismiss my case. However, about 5 or 10 minutes go by, and suddenly there's this other officer who I hadn't met before, who I found out his name is Officer Larry Burke, aka Lawrence Burke, a.k.a. also ex-NYPD officer. And he comes up to me in an active courtroom while the judge in the courtroom is in session. There's someone standing in front of the judge. And I'm waiting my turn, sitting there silently in my seat. Very small courtroom, maybe 10, 12, 15 people are there. And it was a Monday. That's when they do court, Monday evenings. And suddenly this police officer very aggressively tells me I need to leave the courtroom. I need to come with him immediately and leave the courtroom. I said, no, I'm not leaving the courtroom. I'm in here waiting to talk with the judge. And he says, if you don't leave, I will put you in handcuffs. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? What crime do you suspect me of committing, or are you accusing me of? Now, he is disrupting the court, Officer Lawrence Burke. And he says, you are disrupting the court. I said, I'm just sitting here. You're the only person disrupting the court. Then I actually turned to the judge, because this guy's threatening me with violence to remove me violently from the courtroom, the judge's courtroom. And I asked the judge, I said, excuse me, Your Honor, this police officer is attempting to remove me from your courtroom and lying and saying that I'm disrupting the court when he's the one who came in here as I'm silently sitting here. What does the judge say? Does the judge say to the officer, get out of my court right now. This is my courtroom. You're the only one disrupting the court. What does the judge say? He says, you should do what the officer says, tells you to. So I'm not going to be protected by the judge, which supposedly he's the highest arbiter of the law. He just sides with the cop. So under threat of arrest, I start to leave the courtroom, and Lawrence Burke says, no, you got to get your stuff. I hadn't got my stuff. All right, get my stuff. I have no idea what's going on. As I walk down the hallway, the other police officers there are taunting and mocking me. And I'm going to see if there is any security camera footage of that. I will get that and I will show that to you if there is. Why did Officer Larry Burke, under the deprivation of rights under color of law, try to get me removed from the court? Because Officer Kenneth Baker, ex-NYPD 5651, his ego was bruised. I wouldn't take the plea bargain. And I had the audacity to use my First Amendment right to call him a jackass as I left that private office down the hall in the village hall there. He was so bruised, his ego was so bruised, him and Lawrence Burke, officer in charge of all the officers in Cold Spring, colluded, deprivation of rights under color of law, to have me removed from the courtroom. What do I want? I want the townspeople to know the history of the type of police officers that they hire in the village of Cold Spring. Because the people are good people in Cold Spring. They're friendly. They're welcoming. And it's an amazing place to visit. Great restaurants. Great antique shops. Great homemade ice cream place as well. I want the people of Cold Spring to hold their police force accountable. Number one, Kenneth Baker. He needs to be fired. Let's take a look at a little history here of some of the people who have been hired by the village of Cold Spring trustees. First we have here Anthony Pupczyk, badge number 26324, former police officer at Patrol Bureau, Bronx Task Force. There's a theme, by the way. These officers seem to mostly come from the Bronx. Service started July 1987, ended April 2007. Now, he was accused, let's see what he was accused of here. He was one of about a dozen officers from the 48th Precinct in the Bronx indicted after an investigation into rumors of, what's this? Corruption and brutality. Several officers have pleaded guilty, others await trial, and 2 have been acquitted. That smells right there. Continuing. Prosecutors had contended that Officer Pupczyk and Officer Matthew Siciliano illegally entered an apartment at 867 East 179th Street in the Bronx on March 8, 1994, where drug dealing was suspected. But you know what? Police love to prosper from these drug arrests. Prosecutors said that drugs were seized, but that the officers and others split more than $1,000 in drugs proceeds. And that's only what they're acknowledging. There could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars there. Who knows? In the case, prosecutors said they relied on conversations Officer Pupczyk had later with another officer. That officer was among those accused of sharing in the money, and he had agreed to wear a recording device. Officer Pupczyk's lawyer, Walter Rich, contended that the tape was almost inaudible. After a hearing on admissibility of the recording, a judge sided with Officer Pupczyk's lawyer, making dismissal of the charge against the officer virtually certain. That smells to high heaven there. But ladies and gentlemen, guess what? Village of Cold Spring, they look at the history and say, you know what? I think this police officer would probably be an extremely valuable new member of the Village of Cold Spring police force. So what do? They hire him. And what happens? Oh, after he's hired, a Cold Spring officer suspected that a fellow village cop had damaged 4 of his personal vehicles over the past year, but could never prove it until Saturday night. That's when Cold Spring officer in charge, George Kane, as before the present officer in charge, Larry Burke, caught one of his own officers, Anthony P. Pupczyk, 49 now, damaging the fellow officer's vehicle. But the freaking Village of Trustees, the Village Board of Trustees of Village of Cold Spring, they hired that guy. What was that past criminal possibility? It was nothing, right? This cop doesn't just assault the public. He damaged 4 of this officer's vehicles. Fellow officer, for God's sakes. Oh, my God. Kane contacted state police at Wappingers Falls, New York, and they charged Pupczyk early Sunday with third-degree criminal mischief. A felony, said police. State police said. Pupczyk of Yorktown, New York, was released on an appearance ticket for a Cold Spring Village court. Pupczyk was suspended, according to a statement from Cold Spring Mayor Ralph Falloon, who would not comment on whether the suspension was with or without pay. See? Mayor piece of crap as well. What's the truth? Where's the transparency? You haven't seen nothing yet. This just goes deeper. I went down the rabbit hole. How did I find all this? Because after that aggressive cop, Officer Kenneth Baker, ex-NYPD, badge number 5651, ex-NYPD badge number, he smelled like NYPD. His arrogance, his aggressiveness, his disrespect toward me, a member of the public. So I did a little research. Simple Google search, bam. See what I find. And then I discovered this entire rabbit hole of corruption and how the Village Board of Trustees has a history of hiring these violent, corrupt, brutal, criminal ex-NYPD cops. Continuing. Pupczyk was suspended. Again, this garbage Mayor Ralph Falloon would not comment on whether the suspension was with or without pay. Garbage. Unacceptable. What is it? With or without pay? Covering for the cops. Pupczyk was hired as a part-time officer in April 2005. Now, this newspaper article goes on to say, oh, lo and behold, in 1995, Pupczyk was among 16 members of the New York City Police Department charged with burglary and other offenses in a crackdown on corruption in the Bronx. That's Pupczyk. And here, from the site 50-A, where you can look up any NYPD officers past, and this is only the public past. This is like tip of the iceberg. Most of the stuff doesn't make the light of day into the public arena. But this is just what's in the public here. Complaints, 16 allegations, and 7 complaints. And just because they're not, or they say they're unsubstantiated, doesn't mean they didn't happen. And discourtesy, word, abuse of authority, seizure of property, threat of arrest, pushing, shoving, cursing, drag, pulled, cursed, punch, kick, push, shove, punch, kick. Those are just the complaints there. And now let's move on to our next police officer that was hired by the Village Board of Trustees. Now, imagine, would you hire this person? Let's see. Now, we're interviewing this police officer, but before we do, we're going to take a look and see what the past record is of this police officer here. And so let's take a look here. And so this is Scott Morris. and Property Clerk Division, 103rd Precinct, and the 47th Precinct. And 47th Precinct is in the Bronx. There's a theme here. Look at lawsuit settlements. $190,000 there. $4 million settlement. What the hell is that? And what's this? 2 Bronx cops finally punished for their roles in 2012 fatal shooting of an innocent teenager, Ramarley Graham. And what was the article here? Let's take a look. NYPD Sergeant Scott Morris, then hired by the Village of Cold Spring, and Officer John McLaughlin faced departmental charges in connection with the killing of an unarmed, by the way, 18-year-old Ramarley Graham in February 2012. On Thursday, their cases were settled for almost $4 million. Morris will be suspended for 30 days without pay. Then will resign without the good guy, quote-unquote, good guy letter that would have allowed him to carry a weapon, sources said. Meanwhile, McLaughlin accepted a penalty of 45 lost vacation days and was placed on dismissal probation for a year, meaning he could be fired for any infraction. And the cop who shot and killed Graham, Richard Hayes, quit the force earlier this year, shortly before he was going to be fired. No one went to jail. And so I'm glad Sergeant Morris will be off the force within a month, she said. I'm calling on the NYPD and the de Blasio administration to reconsider the probation for McLaughlin. Now, however, he gets hired by Cold Spring, because the Cold Spring Board of Trustees loves to hire corrupt, brutal police officers. Let's take a look here. So after they hire this police officer, what happens? This is in the Highlands Current, great local newspaper. Cold Spring officer resigns. Why? Let's take a read here. A Cold Spring officer who was the supervisor of the scene of a fatal shooting of an unarmed black man, teenager, by the way, in New York City in 2012, said this week he would resign following calls from community members that he be fired. You see, once the community, the people of the village of Cold Spring, knew what this guy did, they demanded he be fired. But the village board of trustees, they saw fit to hiring him, knowing he had that history. They have a history of doing this. It ain't over yet, folks. I'm just scratching the surface. Stay with me here. Mayor Dave Morandi said that Officer Scott Morris, who was hired by the village in December to join his force of about a dozen part-time officers, who are completely unnecessary, by the way. They're just road pirates, revenue generators. He was hired by the village in December to join his force of about a dozen part-time officers. Told him in a phone call on Tuesday that he planned to quit. Morandi said he and other village board members received a bombardment of emails this week questioning the hire. And if you want to redress the government, you go ahead, redress Village of Cold Spring. You see, emails matter, phone calls matter, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to redress this particular government, you're free people. In February 2012, Morris was the sergeant of a New York Police Department narcotics team when 2 officers followed Ramarley Graham, 18, to his Bronx apartment on suspicion that he had been involved in a drug deal. According to news reports, Morris was sitting in an unmarked squad car a few blocks away when told by the officers via police radio that Graham may have a gun. Morris asked them to confirm it. The officers soon responded that they were certain Graham was armed. Soon after, one officer kicked down the door to Graham's apartment, and the other, Richard Hayes, confronted Graham in the bathroom and shot him once in the chest. No weapon was found. However, officers found marijuana in the toilet. Possession of marijuana, death penalty. And how did they think he had a gun? Oh, I know. Most police officers think they're psychic. Pieces of crap. Hayes was indicted on manslaughter charges, but a judge threw out the case. Of course, because judges are on the side of the police, ruling that the prosecutor had given improper instructions to the grand jury. A second grand jury declined to indict Hayes. You think there's justice for police accountability? Obviously not. Case in point. They declined to indict Hayes, who left the department in haste in 2017. The officer said he thought Graham was attacking him. God, cops freaking lie so much. Just like Larry Burke lied and said I was disrupting the court when I'm literally silently sitting in a courtroom waiting for my turn to speak with the judge. An NYPD review reprimanded the officers who entered the apartment for showing bad tactical judgment, but found the killing legally justified. If your blood's not boiling, ladies and gentlemen, an unarmed man was killed because psychic cops said he was armed. And Sergeant Scott Morris said, okay, I guess you must be right. No justice, no peace, no internal investigations. They internally investigated, and surprise, surprise, Gomer Pyle, they found themselves completely innocent. End internal investigations, period. If you want to redress the government, again, you're free people. I can't tell you not to do that. This type of criminal behavior by police will only stop if we hold them accountable. We don't allow people like this to be hired in the first place. And how dare the village hire these people? And there's probably more. I just came upon 4. There's probably a lot more. But how dare they hire these people? And 2 are still working there right now. Officer Kenneth Baker and Officer in Charge Lawrence Larry Burke. Unless we hold these cops and the mayors and the trustees accountable, they all need to be out of a job. Once current Mayor Foley, who she was not in the process as far as I know of hiring Kenneth Baker, but she knows now. And by the way, she told me the other day, because I spoke with her, and she says, I'm going to do an internal investigation. I said, no, you're not. That is not acceptable. I do not accept that. And then she said, oh, by the way, in the village of Cold Spring, not only is she the mayor, she's the chief of police. And I said, you need to tell me who's going to do an outside investigation. I just did it for you here. Look at the public record and fire Officer Kenneth Baker. With prejudice and fire Officer Lawrence Burke. And don't ever let them become police officers again. The Leroy Truth. See you next time. One more thing. By now, many of you have seen the video of the disgusting police officer Eric Duran of the NYPD throwing a heavy cooler at the face of someone on a scooter, killing them. What a surprise. This animal cop worked at the Bronx Narcotics Division, most likely alongside Officer Kenneth Baker. A long list of complaints that would get most people fired from their jobs. Unsubstantiated means nothing. Where there is smoke, there is fire. High standards are not anti-police.